We are here for the launch of this book, Sindh, Stories from a Vanished Homeland. And it has been written by Saz Agarwal, and who is basically a Sindhi, and her family moved at the time of partition. And we have with us to speak on the book a very eminent historian, politician, and academic, Dr. Hamida Khoro. So I think we will have an interesting session today. I have to confess that I have a little bit of a personal interest in this book. When I saw it, I was very excited because my mother-in-law was a Sindhi Hindu, and she married my father-in-law at the time of partition. And they sort of ran away to get married. And once they had got married, then, partition took place, and she didn't see her family again. They just left. So it was many years after, and when her family reconciled to the marriage, that they started meeting up again. And she always tells us that her uncle, he was an ICS, a civil servant. And when after partition, he was sent at the head of a commission to Pakistan to recover abducted Hindu girls. And she laughs and she says that he told his people, boys, just hold off. This girl has married of her own will, so don't bring her back. And so when I read this book, I was very excited because many of the things which she had mentioned, which Saz Agarwal had mentioned in the book, my mother-in-law, I had heard my mother-in-law talking about those same things for over 30 years. And as Saz has said that, the Punjab partition story has been very well documented, but the story about the Sindhi Hindus has not been well documented at all. And in fact, Punjab was partitioned and Bengal was partitioned, so those people who had to leave at partition from either of these places, they had another, similar, they were able to create another homeland in a place which was familiar to them or which had the same language, etc., and culture. But the Sindhi Hindus, as Sindh was not partitioned, so the Sindhi Hindus had to leave, and they actually had to go to far off places to make homes for themselves. So, we see the Sindhi Hindu diaspora in Hong Kong, a large proportion of them in Bombay, and in Africa, India, wherever. And they have, lost not only their property, but they also lost their homeland. And in time, the next generation lost their language and a little bit of their culture also. And the book is is filled with anecdotes and facets of life in pre-partition Sindh, which will strike a familiar chord with Sindhis, mainly of a particular generation, but I think all Sindhis, because the Sindhi Hindus, they spoke the same language, they ate the same food, and they shared many aspects of culture with Sindhi Muslims. They even shared many peers and saints. And somehow I think after their departure, Sindh seems to have become less Sindhi, and we have been thrown into confusion regarding our own identity. So I will invite Dr. Hamida Khoro to give us her views on this book, and also to comment on this, that what does it mean to be Sindhi today? And Hamida Khoro is very well qualified to comment on all aspects of the history and culture of Sindh. She has written many books which have been very highly acclaimed, including the history of Sindh and the story of her father, Muhammad Ayub Khoro, who was Chief Minister of Sindh. So I think that we all will enjoy very much here listening to Hamida Khoro.
Thank you, Durdana. I hope that you will enjoy what I say, because I'm not so sure about my own skills as an orator. I must congratulate Saz actually for writing this book, which has filled a huge gap in our historical writing, particularly of the partition period. Because as Durdana mentioned, in terms of breaking apart, it's Punjab and Bengal, which were the two provinces which were were torn apart. And the stories of those provinces, of the fleeing of refugees, of trains full of dead bodies, of massacres and so on, is very well documented. And lots of books are coming out even now, Wazira Zamindar and various people are writing currently even about these. But Sindh has been completely, as you say, lost in this narrative of partition. Nobody mentions it, and the Hindus of Sindh, who migrated mainly to Maharashtra and to central India, are not, it's you only accidentally or incidentally you may find out where they are living now. There's the Ulhasnagar in Bombay, maybe in Bhopal and in central Indian cities like that, Gandhidham. In fact, there was a project at one time that Sindhis demanded that a province should be given to them in India, in which they should live. So, but that is actually very nicely written up in Saz's book. But the importance of the book, I think, is that it describes from the memories of the people who left Sindh, who went, and they, from the women of those families even, mostly, the memories of how life was in Sindh, how they lived, what were their activities, their whole style. And although what we are used to reading, other people have written about the Sindhi lifestyle, and Moti, Mahesh, what's that? Moti Jotwani, and various people who have recorded in Sindhi at least. In English, I don't think there's so much writing, but in Sindhi, there is some writing of the Hindus who left. But Saz actually describes life outside of Hyderabad and Hyderabad, which was the main cultural capital of Sindh and particularly of the Hindu Amil community. So she's talking about people who were not, she herself, her family that is, comes from Khairodero, a really obscure town in Larkana district. I hope it's in Larkana. Is it Shikarpur or Larkana? Yes, Larkana. Okay. Okay. So it comes from there. That itself is an unusual thing, that her family comes from Khairodero. And then she describes in her book many families who were zamindars in Sindh. They were in agriculture, they were zamindars, and she describes their life, which is completely similar to those of Muslim zamindars. In the same sort of dealings with the cultivators, with the land, and the give and take, and the relationship with the people who work the land is exactly as you would see, and as Muslim zamindars are, and as they are much derided and nowadays, exactly the same. So this and also she doesn't actually cover the Amil life of Hyderabad. She doesn't mention Hyderabad, for instance, which was such an important part of the cultural Sindh at that time, in mid 20th century. And this is, so it really is adding to our knowledge in a very useful way, because when normally you think of Hindus in Sindh, you think of Amils, you think of the people who wrote books, Gurbakshani, who was such a expert on Persian culture, wrote 5 volumes on Shah Abdul Latif. People like that who were scholars and writers and cultural leaders in Sindh at that time, across the board, not only for Hindus, but across the board. And in this case, she is covering, actually, I don't know if your family was Bhaiban. Was it Bhaiban?
They were Amils.
They were Amils. But that doesn't come across so strongly.
It's just, okay, I'll explain later.
Okay. Anyhow, so as I was saying, some gaps in our knowledge are covered by this, particularly by the description of the rural Hindu life in villages. And then she has a wonderful attitude in her writing, when there's I don't come across any kind of complaint about treatment, about the harassment, or there's a complete matter of factness about this. She gives many incidents when the local Muslim population helps the people who are migrating, because eventually in 47, although there was no such thing as bloodletting as there was in the Punjab or in Delhi, but because of the atmosphere, the tension of the atmosphere, because of the of apprehension of what might happen, a lot of families migrated. And then, of course, there were the 2 famous incidents. One is Nawab Shah, when Sikh trains were looted, and then in Karachi, when riots were erupted. That that set off this wave of migration, and so many Hindus left Sindh at that time. But she doesn't mention any, or not particularly any, stories of harassment or injustice that might have occurred. So that you don't feel that there is any rancor in her writings. And that is a very welcome thing in literature which is written by a person who is migrated from Sindh, a Hindu who is migrated from Sindh, and written about it. I think it's a very welcome change, and I hope that future books that are written in the same spirit of accommodation and tolerance, which after all is the main characteristic of Sindhi culture, tolerance and the way people have lived here. As Durdana mentioned, the 2 communities, Muslim and Hindu, had the same saints. Sachal Sarmast, for instance, attracts a lot of Hindu devotees who come even today from India to the shrine, and so many other things. Is it Khizr, Khaja Khizr, that Khaja Khizr or Jhulelal, which is again a great attraction for both the Hindu and the Muslim communities. And I should think that Sevan itself is, of course, a great attraction for both the communities. So, for all these things, I think this book is a very welcome addition to partition literature, and a unique one, particularly for the Sindh thing. I would add that people of Sindh at that time, people who were in authority or who knew about Sindh, did dread the leaving of Hindus and tried to discourage it, because they knew that the Hindu community was the economic backbone of the province. That the traders, that the Shikarpur community was a power in the world. They had trading relations as early as the 18th and 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, when you could find Sindhi traders in the courts of czars of Russia. and Central Asian countries, everywhere. And when the British Empire was established, they were to be found in Hong Kong and the West Indies, and wherever there was the British Empire, this Sindhi, Shikarpuri Hindus, or perhaps even from other parts, would be found there as traders. Sindhvarkis are a very well-known part of the trading world. SARS gives us two very interesting incidents of Sindhvarkis, I suppose they would be. One in Bermuda, oh, no, not Bermuda, Malta, I think it was. One family in Malta in the Mediterranean, which, while getting away from there, with some incident, I read it some time ago, so I can't exactly remember. Yes, so this family is getting away from there in a ship, and the woman was drowning in the sea, but was somehow recovered. So it's a very interesting incident, and if you read the book, do take note of it. And another one, even more remarkable, was in China during an uprising and so on. So where the family survived in possible conditions, but stayed on, didn't go back, just stayed on and continued with their business despite the immense problems. I can't imagine anyone else staying on after that, but they did. So it's that kind of story of, endurance and absolute being true to the purpose for which they were there, which is remarkable, I think, and maybe we should hear more about that. So thank you for bringing it all out and to our attention. I hope this book will be translated into Sindhi. I've got a lot of Sindhi scholars sitting here who are of power and who can manage these things. It should be in Sindhi, and it should then, I think, be a topic for discussion in Sindhi writing as to how we can carry on from there to further research in this matter. So, I also, yes, of course, I must not forget what she describes when the migrants go from Sindh and settle in Bombay and other places. The difficulties that the great thing was, you remember, we know that in this country we had these things of people who supposedly had left great estates behind and came here and claimed those estates. Padine ke baghat vagara, which they were then claimed here. So, but the Hindus who left from here did not make any claims. They did not make claims, they did not, on the basis of what they had left behind, claim anything from India. And Nehru did not give anything. In fact, when people asked him, he used, even at that time, I knew this from before, when he was asked about the compensation, he said, what compensation? We are not giving anything to anybody. So there they didn't get anything, but managed somehow to achieve as important a place economically and culturally as they had. I went to Bombay a few years ago on an official invitation, and I was shown remarkable educational institutions set up by Sindhis who had left from here. And some of them, the people who had established these were themselves migrants. They had left here with memories of these educational institutions in Hyderabad particularly, and gone and established more in India. So that itself, the philanthropy and the education, engagement with education was one of the main characteristics. As you know, that even the old building, which we call the Sindh University building in Hyderabad, was a Vidyalaya, a Hindu school. And that Sadhu Vaswani was a very great educational pioneer in Sindh, as are many schools which are still there, actually. So this, and that tradition is maintained in Bombay in spite of the many difficulties that they had in establishing themselves there. And they do come up with very important educational and hospitals and other charitable organizations. So I think that also ought to be known to us here, to the Sindhi community that is in Sindh, that's us, who are now, we are now in the position of being responsible for maintaining our language, for improving it. Because you remember, you must know, all these gentlemen here certainly do, that the books that were written at the time before partition were written by mainly, of course we have Mirza Khalij Beg and others, but mainly by Hindu writers. First in the dictionary, which is not very thorough, but you know, I can't remember its name, I used, was written by Hindu. That tradition was set, and then of course now we have more, but I wish we had more than we have even now. So there is, this tradition is there, it should be carried on, it should be improved upon, but it is, we must remember that it is our responsibility to give Sindhi a science dictionary, for instance, and things like that, which will enrich the language and enrich the people who are rural people who are studying Sindhi and who come to English or whatever else later in life, that they should from the beginning have these. I must say, talking about myself, I did try to start this tradition of giving dictionaries to children, but I don't know if it's being carried on or not now. But I hope that that sort of tradition, that sort of practice is introduced and is carried on. I don't, we seem to have strayed from the, from the actual your book, but it is something which arises out of there, and it is something that we should take out of this book. The very beautiful stories about people who reconcile to their position of having nothing, of a man who goes from door to door selling saris because he has to make his enemies, and was in fact a educator, I can't remember what, he was a doctor, a skin specialist, but he goes and with the bundle of saris selling it from door to door, because that's the only way that he could maintain his family. So that kind of thing of being, you know, the great thing which we always claim is a Muslim thing, which is being humble, being reconciled to your, to your circumstances and making the best of them, which they did in such a beautiful way. I think that is one of the most admirable things about the life that they led in after leaving Sindh. I think I'll end it there. I hope that these are some of the stories we take from the book and the lessons that we learn from it. Thank you very much, Zahra.
Thank you, Dr. Kuro. You are very right. I think that this book is sort of fills a very a vacuum, you know, in our sort of the partition stories. And but I wanted to ask, you know, I have a lot of other questions which I might raise subsequently, but right now I think I want to ask Saz that, you know, as you said, that it is a very welcome thing that this book, there is no trace of rancor or complaints or, you know, of any injustice. So I would like to ask Saz that when you were, you know, talking to people, then are these stories which you have suppressed, or is it that you actually did not hear these, you know, stories of complaints?
Let me first start by thanking all of you for coming, and I wanted to apologize because I cannot speak Sindhi. I'm sorry. I'm sure many of you, most of you here are Sindhi. But to come back to your question, I wouldn't like to think I've suppressed anything. I would like to think that I have been as accurate as I could possibly be and not distorted or, you know, changed anything in any way. And what you know, when I was working on this project, I got more and more the feeling of admiration for these people who just, you know, they left whatever they had and they just moved on. They made, you know, entered new circumstances and they never looked back. And it was not with any feeling of anger or resentment. It was just a feeling that this is what I have now, and let me work with this. I admire that very much. It also meant that they lost a lot, more than materially. They lost what they had left behind culturally, and Sindhi culture in India is not what it is here, what it used to be. The language is gone. As I said, I myself can't speak any Sindhi. I can understand a little, but, and that's the same for most of my generation. The migrant generation brought their language with them, they just didn't pass it on. And there's very few who write in Sindhi, obviously much fewer than those who speak in Hindi, Sindhi, much fewer who write. But no rancor, no. And that's my perception.
Thank you. And has writing this book changed you in any way? I mean, do you want to explore more about Sindh? Have you been to Sindh, and have you visited any of the places that your parents were?
I have just arrived. We came for the festival. Now, you asked me whether it's changed me in any way. Yes, two things. One is that I never thought of myself as a Sindhi before. There was no connection with the community at all. And after I finished writing this book, I realized how many other millions of Sindhi Hindus there are who feel exactly like me, that they are not Sindhis, although they are. Now, I'm not saying I feel like a Sindhi because I'm not sure I do. Part of the reason is because in India there is fairly negative stereotyping about the Sindhis, and somewhat like it used to be about the Jews in Europe, and not something that one wants to be associated with, even though you can see how untrue it is. But it does exist. I would love to explore Sindh. I would really like to go to I wrote about a place that I don't know anything about, just by talking to people and reading books. How authentic can that be? I need to go and meet more people, explore the places. I would like to. We have 3 days ahead of us, and we're hoping to see as much as we can. Whatever one can see in 3 days.
One,
please.
Well, I didn't mention this, but you have put it in your book about the religion of Sindhis. About Sindhi religion and how it differs from mainline Hinduism. So, because there's a huge admixture of Sikhism. And I remember as a child going to my ceremonies or weddings of my friends, Hindu friends, and they always were in a gurdwara. So I want to know if the Hindus have maintained that in India, or if they
it's very much
changed.
There. As far as I know, the families that people that I met while writing the book, many of them also, they revered the peers and the fakirs, traditionally for generations of their families. Some of them took that back with them, but some of them may not have. That I can't say about very accurately, but yes, Guru Nanak, the Sikh religion, every Sindhi home, every Hindu Sindhi home has a picture of Guru Nanak and Guru Granth Sahib, and on the religious occasions there'll always be, they'll have prayers said from both books, religions.
So you mentioned about the stereotyping of the Sindhis, sorry. And I'm a bit surprised about that, because the Sindhi Hindus was the educated professional class, and in fact I know that there were your father grandfather was a lawyer practicing in Hyderabad.
Yeah.
And my mother-in-law's father, he was a lawyer also practicing in Larkana.
Okay.
So these were all professional people,
Yeah.
very hardworking and
competent.
competent.
Yeah.
So why this stereotyping, do you think?
It's very hard to know how these things happen. You have to be, I suppose you have to understand things like brand building, because Dr. Kyodo mentioned, this kind of icon that I have of this Sindhi skin specialist, a doctor who arrived in Calcutta with nothing, and the only way he could survive was by selling something. And he started selling the saris, and when he had collected enough money, by living frugally, he bought a practice with the best skin specialist in Calcutta. And there were thousands and thousands more like him. And the problem is that they were invisible. They were, you know, the humble people living their life, doing whatever they could in a quiet way. When we talk about the horrors of partition, part of the reason was that people thought, you know, they had these concepts of honor that were very different from what we think, you know, about how life should be led, be nice to everybody, and, you know, carry on with whatever you have, what God has given you, make the best of that. They thought that, okay, somebody comes in my way, I have to chop off his head. Now, in Sindh, it did not happen like that. If things are changing, you understand your priorities. Okay, this is what I want. You know, my life is going to change now. I will make a better life elsewhere. And, you know, that's what they did. They just went and they did that. It's hard to understand where that negative stereotyping comes from. Partly, I would blame Bollywood. Because we have in Hindi movies negative characters, Sindhi characters who, you know, they say is Ade Sai, and, you know, they would like smoking cigarettes, papad, and partly Sindhis really did leave their language and their culture behind. So what did they have? They had to make money. That was very important for them. So money became, maybe not for the migrant generation, but for the second generation, maybe that became their God. Again, I'm not saying that this happened, I'm saying maybe, because that could be one reason why we have this feeling that, and then, you know, you have a few people who behave in a certain way, and that gives you, you know, that shows the world that your whole community is like that. Everybody else is going about their business, doing you know, whatever they have to do in a quiet, dignified way. Nobody sees that. Dr. Khurdo also mentioned that she saw the education institutes in Bombay. And it's true. I don't know how many they are because I'm not good at keeping track of, you know, oh, we are so great, we did this and we did that. But there are a huge number which came up. Nobody says that Sindhis are great educationists. They say that Sindhis are shrewd, you know.
Can I add just one sentence to that? I think part of it, large part of it, was probably jealousy of the great success that Sindhis, who had a long, centuries-old history of business, trade, and success, of being successful, were able to do that in Bombay and cause envy among the people who were already there, who probably felt that this was sort of, you know, an intrusion on their life.
Maybe they felt that they're taking away something we should have had. You know, who are they? Where did they come from? Now, you know, again, I'm telling you that I never heard anything about Sindh. All the years I was growing up, I did not hear a word about Sindh. Part of the reason could be that my father was not Sindhi. My mom married outside the community, and then we grew up, my brother and I grew up in South India, far away from, we used to meet the families only occasionally. So we didn't have somebody talking to us in Sindhi. We didn't have anyone telling us about what it was like. My mother never said a word. Even my grandparents didn't talk about it. An uncle of mine told me, I used to ask my father, and he would say, why do we have to talk about something that doesn't exist anymore? Let's look at what we have to do now. So, in the case of, sorry, I've lost my thread. I was saying about, what was the question you asked me?
About success and, you know, being jealousy of the locals. That we had.
Sorry. I was trying to make a point, but it's gone.
Memories from...
Yeah, okay. I was just saying that my mom never said anything, but what really surprised me was that when I started talking to her, about 2 years ago, I said, okay, tell me everything. And I was astonished to see that she remembered so much. It was all there. You know, it's like there's this divide which can never be recrossed, and the memories on the other side were as fresh as the day that they had happened. She described things to me in detail. I could see the, what was, and it was so progressive. I mean, we call it progressive today. We call it inclusive. They were doing that back then. I mean, that's a word that, came into the popular usage now. But they were doing that then. There were no religious barriers. If you had a temple, if you had a gurdwara, if you had, dargah, whatever, it was a holy place. If it was a holy person, you revered that person. You didn't say, are you Hindu? Are you Muslim? You just, that was somebody you respected. Women were coming also, women were getting educated. So I feel that that's something that, we took a step back. And my mom even remembered the date on which her ship landed. She was 13 years old. She remembered the date on which the ship from Karachi landed in Bombay. And she, I was just astonished. She remembered how much her father used to earn. She remembered what his monthly salary was in Hyderabad. She remembered how much he earned in Bombay, and when they came to Bombay, that was really important because they didn't have anything. So when he got a job which was 800 rupees a month, that was a big deal. So, it was kind of, and they never talked about it. We didn't know. They were always thinking about, okay, what do we do next?
Dr. Khuro, I was wondering if you might comment on this, the fact that the Sindhi Hindus, they were they had a lot of these, as you mentioned, the institutions, and they were doing a lot of writing. And so how has the cultural and literary landscape changed since they left?
Sindhi became the official language. Sindhi became the official language when the British rule, when Sindh was attached to Bombay. Now, if we'd been attached to the Punjab, we would have had Urdu, but we were attached to Bombay, and the British government had devised a system whereby the local language used to be taught in schools and courts and at all the lower level, and then English used to take over as the language of government. Now, so when Sindhi schools were established at that time in the 19th century, they needed teachers, they needed books. They needed books of geography, of history, of etc., everything. And people were commissioned to write these books. So as I mentioned before, Mirza Khalid Beg was one of those early ones, very prolific writer, with translations from English were also encouraged and from European languages. So, and the others were Hindu writers. Mostly they were Hindu writers who translated books from English and who wrote books for use in schools. So, and strangely for mathematics and science, we used to import teachers from South India. Maharashtrian and South Indian were the teachers for mathematics and science. So, but all the other subjects, for which books were written mostly by, I mean, there were some Muslim writers, but mostly by Hindu writers. So then from that, they developed into a good literary tradition of writing. There was that, so that was one of the characteristics, particularly of the Amil community, which itself had, historically in Sindh, the Amils had been the educated people who were experts in Persian, and they were part of the Talpur government and of the Kalora government, of the Mughal government before that, since they always were the financial advisors and munshis, as they were called. In those days, what you would call a minister now would be a munshi. So they were the munshis of the Talpur governments, and they were therefore the people who were educated. And that tradition was kept up during the British, and then they, of course, from that they also then a lot of these teachers, or who had been teachers, or sadhus even, became then initiators and pioneers of education and set up institutions. As I mentioned, the Vidyala, Navidyala also, and various other, there are, I'm sure you all, and that's right. Yes, and so they set up institutions in Hyderabad, and it was also we have a family here, I don't think there's anyone from them here, the Shahani family, which is still here in Pakistan, in Sindh, and the Dayaram Jetmal and his family, he was one of, the Dayaram Jetmal was one of the first batch of students who did matriculation, because in those days you had to go travel by sea to go to Bombay to do matriculation. So he was one of those 4 or 5 students in a boat going to Bombay, being very seasick on the way, but getting his matriculation. So then his family and others, they then got the idea of setting up a college here. So the Dayaram Jetmal College was established in Karachi with, of course, a lot of help from the government, because the British, if they saw that somebody was taking the first step and actually getting some money together to set up an institution, would help. And so this aid was given, and this very beautiful building, which is one of the heritage buildings of Karachi, was set up at that time as the college. And of course, this Shahani family, I have to say, was one of the great benefactors of the city at that time. You know that this Pakistan Chowk, which all of you know, was contributed by them. It was a fish market or some such thing. They bought it and gave it to the city. It's become a square. There's that beautiful buildings next to it, the Sarnagati building and others, hostels, which were also their donation. They've all helped in various other education. As you know, the educational institutions are around Pakistan. Sorry to go into the history of Karachi now, but they're all around there. The NED college is there. That was, of course, helped again by the British and by a very great Parsi, something Naruddin Edalji Dinshaw, NED College of Engineering. Dinshaw was the main chap there, and so on. So there have been all these benefactors, educationists, and as you mentioned, you know, there's the DJ College and so on. So they had this tradition, a very strong tradition of educational institutions and hospitals. For instance, there's a famous hospital in Shikarpur. I'm sure you remember the name of Shikarpur में अस्पताल है ना एक मशहूर. Okay, so those, and then Abdullah Harun, who was a Muslim, rich Muslim businessman, also contributed, and he has a ward there. But it was the initiative of this Hindu philanthropist, and many such institutions were set up in Sindh. So that they carried on in Bombay, as you said.
So I'm sure that the audience may have some questions, and I will now invite, yes. Do we have any mics?
Well, thank you for the seniority, and my question is for Hamida. Unless she promises to give me a cup of tea with some good biscuits, it is
toast with marmalade.
Toast with marmalade.
Right.
Well, I was in Bombay when in the late 40s, and I saw the Sindhis trickling in, and my father's Gujarati Hindu partner in business was particularly angry about it, because the Hindus were much more dynamic, and they were giving them a good time, difficult time, and they said, "इनसे तो वो मुसलमान अच्छे थे, ये तो गोश्त खाते हैं, ये तो शराब पीते हैं, तो हमारे सामने गोश्त खाते हैं." But that was not my question. There are many things like the introduction of the word lassi.
Yes.
I mean, there was a Sindhi, he said lassi, so I asked my uncle, "What is lassi?" He says, ये अब ये ही कहते हैं, हम तो छाछ कहते थे. So, but my question to Hamida is, Hamida, your father was instrumental in stopping the one and the only riot of any magnitude that took place
Karachi.
in Karachi. Am I right?
Yes.
But I think, I have a feeling, please correct me, the lady on the right,
On the left.
or on my right, your left.
Yes.
I'm always right. So, my question to any of the three ladies is that isn't because of the strong Sufi culture of Sindh that the riots never took place? One thing. And the other question is that how come people in the Thar, I've visited the temples there also, there's no Guru Nanak, the Guru Granth Sahib there. So why this divide? Thank you.
Why the divide, meaning what?
I mean, why Gurdwara and Granth Sahib, I mean, Sikh influence in the main of Sindh, but on the Thar side, which is closer
Yes.
to Rajasthan, why there's, but they have Gita.
We should have
and
asked
they
this
have-
question from the late Rana Sahib. He was very knowledgeable.
Okay, thank you.
But anyhow, that's true that the riots were stopped immediately. And in fact, my father was chief minister at that time, and the political leadership and was very aware of the fact that Hindus, the loss of Hindus would mean a great vacuum in the life of Sindh. They knew it, that the business, trade, economy would suffer greatly, that culture would suffer greatly. They knew this. And as a result, my father persuaded the Indian High Commissioner, Sri Prakasha, to travel into Sindh with him to try and persuade people not to migrate. So they went to upper Sindh districts. In Karachi, perhaps they were not so influential, or in Hyderabad, they were, the Hindu community's thinking was quite defined. But in upper Sindh, they went into all the districts to try and persuade them not to leave. And a lot of people, that's why even now you find a lot of people in upper Sindh, Jacobabad, and upper Sindh is the place where there are still early sources that the Hindu community in Sindh, main Hindu community in Sindh, perhaps not in Thar, is the original population still there, came from the Punjab, migrated here 400 years ago, let's say, in the late Mughal, when the Mughal rule was declining and there was a lot of insecurity. They migrated to Sindh, a lot of. So the Hindu community in Sindh actually is migrant community from the Punjab. And they brought the Sikh religion with them, which then which got diluted by mainstream Hinduism, but retained. It was very strong actually at the time of partition among the Hindus. I mean, it would be Guru Granth, which would be recited, Gurdwaras where they would go. So it's really, and although there were pictures of Ram, Sita and so on, but the real worship was Sikh.
Thank you, Dr. Kuro. Can I ask?
I have a question from Dr. Hamida Kuru Sahiba. When we use word Hindu for our learned Sindhis and Muslims, so are we annex the same or extend the same policy of the establishment, giving religion the priority, rather than we ask them urban Sindhis or rich Sindhis, why you are intermingling religion with Sindhis and making them minorities?
I'm not sure what the question was. Sindhi mein budayo.
Sindhi में तो बताया.
हाँ.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Agarwal. ॻाल्हि हीअ आहे त असां जॾहिं हिंदू ऐं मुस्लिम जो टर्म यूज़ था कयूं
जी.
साॻी क़ौम जे लाइ,
हाँ.
इहो त एस्टेब्लिशमेंट थी चाहे
हा
हिकिड़ा माइनॉरिटी हुजनि या मेजॉरिटी हुजनि त असांजो दानिश्वर इन क़िस्म जे रो ऐं फ्लो में छो थो वहे?
सिंधी चवणु खपे बिल्कुलु बि अॼु असां कॾहिं अंग्रेज़नि जो ॻाल्हाईंदा आहियूं वी से इंग्लिश वी डोंट से कैथलिक और प्रोटेस्टेंट or this or that. So that is absolutely valid, that why we interpose communal definitions. That's wrong, and I hope that will go out gradually. जीअं असां वटि हाणे थोरो वधीक ब्रॉड माइंडेड एजुकेशन खे चवंदा आहिनि त सभु का शइ वॾी शइ आहे. मां नथी भायां, मां भायां थी टेम्परामेंट. असां वटि 1000 साल बुद्धिज़्म रही आहे हिन मुल्क में, ऐं उन खां पोइ इहो सूफ़िज़म एंड ऑल दैट, एंड देर इज़ ऐं वॾो स्ट्रॉन्ग हिते ईरान जी वॾी इन्फ्लुएंस हुई. ईरान हो हुते ज़ोरेस्ट्रियन, तंहिंखां पोइ ईरान जी सूफ़िज़म जेका आहे इन्वेंशन ईरान जी आहे. सूफ़ी जो वर्ड मीन्स somebody who wears a woolen blanket. ऐं उन उतां जा जेके मलंग हूंदा या जेके हूंदा उहे उन कोट पाईंदा हुआ वुली, जंहिंखे सूफ़ी क्लॉथ सम्झो था. सो उहे उन्हनि अची उन्हनि इहो डेफिनेशन ॾिनी त भई फ़िरक़ो न हुअणु घुरिजे, यानी की ऐं ॿियो रिचुअल रिलीजन जेको आहे उन खे पासे करे रुॻो ख़ुदा सां राब्तो करणु घुरिजे. So this is of course was adopted by Sindhis. जेके बि हिते आया पीर जीअं लाल शहबाज़ ऐं सवान घणो करे ईरान खां हूंदा, किथां बि टर्कीअ खां या अरेबिया खां, पर ईरान जे रस्ते खे हिते आया ऐं हिते उहो ई हिननि नॉन डिनोमिनेशनल रिलीजन जी ऐं अलाह जी सिधी साईं राब्ते सां उनजे ते ज़ोर रखियो. ऐं तंहिंजे करे सूफ़िज़म एंड दिस काइंड ऑफ जेका तव्हां डिफाइन कई, इहा हिते वॾी स्ट्रॉन्ग इन्फ्लुएंस हुई. पर पोइ इहो 20वीं सदी तव्हांखे इहो सम्झणु घुरिजे. आई एम सॉरी टू गिव अ लेक्चर हियर, बट द फैक्ट इज़ दैट यू हैव टू रिमेंबर दैट when the British came here and established their rule in the 19th century, they found that 1857 there was very little difference between the behavior of the Hindus and the Muslims, who were all fighting on the same side. And they decided to create the divisions. Aisha Jalal has written a very good analysis of this, that they created laws, कानून ऐं कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन अहिड़ी ठाही वई जंहिंमें कम्यूनल डिफरेंसिस खे एम्फसाइज़ कयो वियो. ऐं तव्हांखे जेकॾहिं नौकिरी खपंदी हुई, इफ यू वॉन्टेड अ जॉब, यू हैड टू से आई एम अ हिंदू, आई एम अ सिख, आई एम फलानी कम्युनिटी, फलाने बिलीव्स. If you are a Muslim, you had to say that. I'm a Shia, I'm a Sunni, I'm Muslim, and so on, so that your job was decided on that basis. So, इहे जेके 100 साल खां मथे इहा ॻाल्हि रही, इन वॾियूं डिविजन्स क्रिएट करे छॾियूं, सियासी, इकोनॉमिक, हर कंहिं क़िस्म जूं. ऐं सो जेकॾहिं असांजी गवर्नमेंट जेकॾहिं अञा ताईं ईअं करे थी, त उहो तव्हां ख़बर आहे त CSS ऑफिसर्स जेके आहिनि, उहे हूंदा हुआ इंग्लिश ब्रिटिश रूल जो चोथों पिलर. इहे सॼा हूंदा फ़ौज, जुडिशरी बि, इहो ब्यूरोक्रेसी, इहे सभु हूंदा हुआ जेके पाया जेके ब्रिटिश रूल खे कंदा हुआ सपोर्ट. सो उहे अञा ताईं रूल पिया था कनि.
My name is Satar
The person
Zangejo.
who has the mic, I think, has an advantage.
My name is Satar Zangejo. First of all, welcome here in Rajdhani of Karachi, Rajdhani Karachi of Sindh. So my question is there. Today morning I bought your book. In your book, lots of pics. I saw one of pic in Roman script, one of pic in Arabic script. Here. If Sindhis are living in abroad or in India, in anywhere, if they write in Roman script, you think they can save their language? And second, my opinion, Madam Hamida Koro said that Hindus, they were living in before partition. They have lots of philanthropy work. Now our Sindhi Hindus, they have no any philanthropy work.
Where, here or abroad? Yeah.
First, regarding the script, I think that we could be debating this endlessly. It's really not a good idea for me to give my opinion because I don't know anything. From a common sense point of view, it does seem that if the script is Romanized, it would be used more easily, and children could learn it easier because they already know the script. Otherwise, that becomes a barrier. But really, I don't want to get into big trouble by recommending that. The other question you had was regarding philanthropy. Sindhis are very, very philanthropic. Every big Sindhi business house, they do a lot of in India and globally. I know in Bombay, everybody, whether it's the Chavyas or the Hindujas or you name them, they have a foundation, and that foundation has separate resources which is only for putting out whatever they believe should be contributed to society.
Yes, I have two questions. One question is from Madam Khoro. As I have viewed in different chapters, this is a tragic narrative by Saz. As a historian, from Madam Khoro, this question, as a historian, will you tell us that is not this responsibility of history upon us, Sindhi Muslims? I am using again the same term. Upon us that we get apology from these exiled people because we Sindhi Muslims supported sectarian politics. And these people are still living under the feeling of exile. There is a chapter of by this title, Exile. And this is the question from our worthy guest. As you are wandered from migration, what will say about those Hindu families who are still migrating from Sindh?
Do you mean those Hindu families who have not migrated from Sindh?
Now.
Who are migrating now,
migrating
I
now.
see.
Who are migrating now.
Is perpetual narrative. Still there is 47 in Sindh.
If I can start with the second question, which you have not asked me. The thing is that there is migration now, absolutely right, from upper Sindh where the people had stayed behind. There are migrations. But that is not a specifically Hindu problem. Law and order is a problem for all of us. You know that every day people are kidnapped and killed. And I mean, if you keep a count, I don't know, it will be more Hindus or more Muslims proportionately.
This is quite different. This is happening with Hindus.
Kamat. Saz, first of all, I am very thankful to you that you wrote on the Sindh. And second thing is that you shouldn't be accused that you don't know Sindhi. I am telling you, being a Sindhi, I am very ashamed that most of the Sindhi people are not teaching their kids Sindhi because they feel they are not good professionals if they talk in Sindhi.
Muslims had said, don't go, we will look after you, you stay in my house, and this is something which they knew that is the way it was, and I think it's okay. And for them to have done what they did, they put it behind them, and they moved on, and I think it's fine for you to also feel that it's okay, whatever happened, let's just deal with what's happening now. You asked me also, you asked me another question? You asked me a question? About, see, I also feel the world is in state of flux. There's migrations happening everywhere. People move whenever they feel that their situation, they are not happy with their situation and they want to move. It's not happening only here. It happens everywhere. I mean, my brother left, he lives in London. Why did he do that? Nobody chased him away. He wanted to go. He made his life there. I don't think there's any reason to worry about that. And if there is an issue here, it is a problem of government. And like I always say, in our countries, in India and Pakistan, we have everything. Our countries have everything. We have the best of everything. We have the best natural resources. We have the best climate. I mean, look at the other countries we see where people, we have very good climate. Our people are the best. We are the smartest, kindest, nicest people. What we lack is good government. Both in, both our countries, we do not have good government. And that is the reason why things go wrong. So rather than apologizing, I think we need to try and, strengthen our governments. I don't have a solution for that, but I think that's what we need.
Thank you, Saz. I think that was a very good point at which to end this discussion. I think that you...
Very important that I would like. Please.
Last one.
Yes. Hello. I am Inder Ahuja, human rights activist. I see, even after 60 years of migration, Indian Hindus have hearts and minds, even the new generation, with their origin, Sindh. But, and the same is from the Pakistani Sindhis. They want to have a bondage, permanent bondage with the Indian Sindhis. But a problem which I feel that especially in the US and UK, where they can have, but they have they have the Sindhi organizations like World Sindhi Congress, but no member from the Indian Sindhis. Indian also many societies in US and UK, but no members from the Pakistani Sindhis. This gap, how to contain this, or you can also make research on this and see to it how to bring that gap between that, because if the Indian Sindhis and Pakistani Sindhis living abroad come together, they can bring us together, Pakistani Sindhis, and here, this is for Sati Agarwal as well as for Hamida Moro, why we are lacking this.
It only needs initiative.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. Yeah.
I think if you just ask Sana or what's the Hindu Sindhi Indian Sindhi organization, if you just ask them, look, this you haven't done that, they'll do it. I don't think there's any question of a policy of not to include. Yes, well, that can, the direction can be changed only if there's a public demand. Anything can be changed if there's a public demand.
I want to say
I completely agree. I was going to say the same thing, that there has to be initiative, and I think instead of asking questions, we need to, if we think something needs to be done, we need to do it. So, let's do it.
So I think we can wind up here. I'll congratulate... I think, Saz, if you thought that you can just write a book and that's it, you know that you have your work cut out
No.
for you.
That's one thing I wanted to say, which I didn't say. When I started writing this book, I didn't realize that it was a journey. I was going on a journey.
It's going to be a huge
and that journey is not
responsibility.
over yet.
They're going to take you over now.
Thank you, Dr. Khuro. It was a very good talk that you gave, and I thank Saz Agarwal also. And please buy the book, because it's really something that you should read.